Welcome, everyone. All the Stranger Things dweebs who are out there. Welcome. I am so excited that you're here. Anyone who's watching this, anyone who is as much of a dweeb and a fan as I am of Stranger Things, welcome to today's session. I want to see how everyone is. So I know that we have a chat going on. So anyone who's here, I want to hear your name, your role, and your biggest prediction on who's going to die in Stranger Things. Who do you think the main character death is going to be? So Duffer Brothers have teased out that there's going to be a main character that dies in season 5, which is the finale. So I want your name, your role, what you do for work, and your prediction on the main character that you think is going to die. And then I also want, if you don't like that question, you can bing in with, do you think that Nancy is going to end up with Jonathan Byers, or is she going to end up with Steve, or is she going to end up alone in the end? I want everyone's chat. I want to hear everyone's thoughts going on here. So welcome to everyone who is here. I am going to jump into a very spicy topic today. So today we are going to do 5 stranger sales things. So we're going to do kind of a play on words like we did last session. And we're going to cover 5 topics and theories about Stranger Things in the series within season 5. So if you think that maybe I'm just a small cursory fan of Stranger Things, I cannot tell you how wrong you are. The degree of wrong that you are. I spend a lot of time watching this series. It doesn't mean that I know anything. That just means I spend a lot of time watching this series. So we're going to go into 5 theories that I have based on season 5 and the footage so far. So I went into a ton of different theories in the last session, but we're going to go into 5 buckets of theories. And then we're going to go into 5 different questions, strange sales questions that people ask in Discovery, or they ask in Cold Call, whether they're an SDR or they're an AE. They can shut their buyer down and make their buyer hang up before the conversation even really begins. Okay, so why don't we jump in? I'm debating on whether we should do Stranger Things or we should do questions first. Why don't we jump in with Stranger Things? Because I actually have 6 buckets. So I'm going to give us a little bit of an agenda on the types of topics that we're going to cover, and then we'll jump in here. So the first thing that I wanted to go into, the first bucket that I'm going to go into, is things that were alluded to in season 5. So there was a lot of different Easter eggs that the Duffer Brothers dropped. So I wanted to go into some of the things that they alluded to in season 5 in the first 4 episodes that have come out so far. Then I want to go into the second topic that we're going to cover for Stranger Things, is basically a redefinition of what is Dimension X and Upside Down. What are basically all the stuff that we covered last time in terms of what are all the relationships that you think are real that aren't real? What are all the ones that exist that maybe you missed? A couple of the mentions of Back to the Future that happened. And especially in the second topic, I'm going to go into the hive mind. So the negative hive mind that basically Vecna or the Mind Flayer is using, and then potentially a positive hive mind that I can see coming within the second half of season 5. We're then going to transition to the third bucket, is we're going to go into all of the history. So for anyone who has seen all of these Stranger Things seasons, but hasn't seen the first shadow, this bucket is really going to be for you. So what is the history behind Joyce Byers, behind Hopper, behind Karen Wheeler and Ted Wheeler and Henry? They all went to school together, and Alan Munson, which was Eddie Munson's uncle. For anyone who I work on automating sellers' workflows, and I fear, but also think Steve may be on the block. That's a good guess. Hi, Amanda. That's a good guess. I've heard a lot of themes on poor Steve that he's going to get his head chopped off the block. So that's a good guess. So her guess, for everyone who didn't see it in the chat, her guess is that Steve is going to be the main character that's going to die. So they've teased that there's going to be one. Maybe they're going to be potentially more than that. They teased for sure that there's going to definitely be one. So the third bucket that we're going to go into is basically all the history behind all those characters. So when you saw the flyer in season 5, the flyer where Joyce Byers was handing out that flyer to a play, that is actually all part of the first shadow. And the reason that's important is because it's all canon for the Duffer Brothers, meaning they said that everything that they went into in the play and everything that they covered there from a material perspective, they're taking as like the actual truth. So full disclosure, Henry slash Vecna slash One actually fell in love with someone. So that's going to be really important. We're going to go into that in bucket 3. Bucket 4, we're going to go into the theme of good versus bad and why that's important. Bucket 5, we're going to go into full circle, the theme of coming full circle and why that's important. And then bucket 6, we're going to go into the big bomb of who is the person that I believe for sure is going to be the main character death. Who is the person, if any, that are come back that haven't come back already? And then what is going to happen in the end? So I'm going to double down on the theory that I shifted out before season 5 was pushed out, but we're going to go into the really meaty topics here at the end. Okay, so why don't we jump in? So we're going to start with things that they alluded to in season 5. So the first one on deck is, why did they pee on that wall? What a weird way to start. Why did they pee on that wall? Why did that military guy pee on the wall? So essentially what that is, and I want to explain basically the 3 worlds and how they coexist with each other so that you can have a little bit of understanding there. What that wall is, I believe, is, I'm already getting hyped up. I'm like already hot in the face. What that wall is essentially is the wall between the Upside Down and Dimension X. So for anyone who's watched the series, there's basically 3 worlds that are going on. You have Dimension X, which isn't bound by time or gravity. You have Upside Down, which is bound by time, but only one time, which is November 6, 1983. And then you have Hawkins, which is current, present day. It's also bound by time, but it's ongoing. And then technically you have a 4th world, which is the Void, which is when you see 11, or anyone use their telekinetic powers, or they're looking for someone, they're essentially going into the Void, which just has a floor of water, essentially. So the Dimension X, that's where the Mind Flayer lives. And essentially, there's only a few things or creatures that can go into that world. So essentially what happened in the beginning was Dr. Brenner's father was going on a mission to try to become invisible as a ship. This is all in the first shadow. And what ended up happening is he accidentally ended up going to Dimension X. So at that point, the Mind Flayer infused Dr. Brenner's father with some of his, with the Mind Flayer particles within his blood on the USS Eldridge, and then he came back. So when he came back, him and one Russian scientist are the only 2 that made it back. And essentially the Russian scientists stole a whole bunch of equipment and took it and stored it into a bunch of caves, as you might remember in season 5. So essentially, when that happened, Dimension X, the only people who have quote unquote been there is Henry, which he turned into Vecna to be able to access Dimension X. Henry, the Mind Flayer, Will, and Holly are the only 4 that have been to Dimension X so far. So 11, for instance, cannot get into Dimension X. So you have Dimension X, Upside Down, and you have Hawkins. And for Dimension X, the Mind Flayer is there, and Vecna can go there, and Vecna can also go into the Upside Down. The Upside Down is bound by time, and it's by one time, and it's November 6, 1983, and Vecna can go there, Will can go there, Holly can go there, and you've seen a lot of the characters be able to go there, and 11 can go there. So 11 can go into Hawkins and the Upside Down, but can't go into Dimension X. Vecna, this is very important, Vecna can go into the Upside Down and into Dimension X, but cannot go into Hawkins. So as you'll remember, like the entire point of this series essentially is the Mind Flayer wants to get into Hawkins. It wants to flay individually people's minds to basically turn everyone against each other and overcome people through fighting in Hawkins. So essentially one of the problems or one of the shortcomings of Vecna is he cannot go into, once Henry was pushed through that wall with 11, he can no longer go into Hawkins, but 11 can't go into Dimension X. So I believe that wall, essentially, the reason that, well, let's start with why he was peeing on it. The reason that the military guy was peeing on it is, if you'll remember, 8 came back at the end of the end of episode 4. And what Eight's connection is she was one of the children within the experiment with Dr. Brenner. So full disclosure, I went into in the last episode, the reason that 8, 11, and Henry are connected is they all have Dr. Brenner as a true father. The rest of the kids in there are just infused with Henry's blood. But how they are unique, 8, 11, and Henry in one, quote unquote, is they all have Dr. Brenner, I believe, as a father. That hasn't been revealed yet. But that's how they're essentially all special, because it makes no sense why Henry and Dr. Brenner knew that 11 was special. Like, why her? Why was she special among all the other kids? She had really early, small powers, quote unquote, in the beginning, but they kept pushing her because they knew she was special. And essentially, Henry goes into that at one point. He takes her aside and he says, like, hey, we're like you and I. And what he's talking about is they both have Dr. Brenner, is that they share him as a father. So essentially, when 8 came into connection, she ran away from the lab, essentially, and she got away successfully. And when 8 was brought back in episode 4, we're going to get into why she was brought back. But her power, what she can do, is she can create basically images that aren't real for people to see. So why I think that military cop is peeing on the wall is because 8 is present, and she has some kind of image in front of the wall that makes the military not see the wall as what it is. But essentially, why 11 can't get through it. So you saw it at one point that she tried to open it with her powers. Why she couldn't get through it is because she tried and tried and tried, but she doesn't realize that that's the passage to Dimension X, and Dimension X is a place that she can't go. So if you look at the season 5 poster, this is going to get super nerdy. Sometimes I hear myself talking out loud and I'm like, God, that gets some friends. So if you look at the season 5 poster, you'll notice there are 3 characters in the middle, and how they're stacked is Vecna, Will, and 11. And the reason they're stacked in that way, I believe, is because Vecna can get into, Dimension X and the Upside Down. Will can get into all 3, which is his strength and why the Mind Flayer is going to use him in the future, which we're going to get into. And then 11 can only get into the Upside Down and into Hawkins. So that's why they're stacked like that. So 11 can't figure out why she can't get in there. And she also can't figure out why that military person is peeing on the wall. I believe it's because 8 is putting up some kind of image to where they don't see the wall for what it truly is. Okay, a couple of other themes on here. Just FYI, anytime that water can't be present in the Upside Down. So you'll notice every single time they go into the Upside Down, there's absolutely 0 water. And whenever that cop was peeing on the wall, sorry to keep bringing up pee, like it started to eat away at the wall, because any kind of water, it's going to be in the void and it's going to be in Hawkins, but you will never see water in Dimension X, or you'll never see water in the Upside Down itself. Okay, a couple other things. Yeah. Will. That was a big blow up. I feel like I'm smug. Do I sound smug, everyone? Because I told everyone in the last episode that Will has powers. Okay, so essentially Will, like I'm really trying not to say I told you so. So Will essentially has powers. That is now very clear to everyone. What he is he's called a shadow walker. So he can take on the perspective of basically anyone in Dimension X, including the hive mind, including Vecna, including, any kind of anyone there, anyone in the Upside Down, including a Demogorgon, for instance, or one of those creepy bats. And then he also can take on the perspective of anyone in Hawkins. So Will essentially what a Shadow Walker is, they can take on the perspective of anyone. That is their strength. That is something that Vecna can't do. So you notice that Vecna was saying a lot of things to Will. The reason that I chose you is that you're weak. The reason that I chose you is because it worked on you. Essentially, that's negative talk at him. But Vecna realizes very much that he has a limitation. That limitation is he can only be as Vecna, he can only be in Upside Down and in Dimension X. As Henry, he can only be in Hawkins, but he cannot be both. And a Shadow Walker can go to all 3. So essentially, that's what Will's strength is. That's what makes him arguably more powerful than Vecna for the Mind Flayer in specific, is Will can go to all 3. So the powers that he can have, so the episode is called The Sorcerer. So essentially, he can take on the perspective and use the same level of power as Vecna in terms of telekinesis. At the exact same time. So you'll notice sometimes he was transitioning into quote unquote good perspectives, like he was transitioning from a Holly's perspective to, okay, now I'm a Demogorgon, and this was all accidental, because anytime that he gets close to one of those like quote unquote frequencies, essentially, he has no choice. He accidentally slips into their perspective. So he can see a lot of things, and he also has what's called true sight. So he can see at all times everything, essentially. So that can be used for good. I'll give you a hint. And that can also be used for bad. It doesn't necessarily have like Will's quote unquote a good guy, which we're going to get into one of the latter themes. There is no good guy or quote unquote bad guy, essentially, but he has true sight, which means he can see everything at once. So essentially, that's why in season 2, he was able to see where Hopper was, even though he was buried in the vines. And that's why they had to basically knock him out, because he was quote unquote a spy of like, he can spy for Vecna. Really, who he's spying for is the Mind Flayer. And he can also spy for, the people on the Hawkins side. Okay. There's one point I want everyone to pay attention to or note. When Will was describing something to Joyce Byers at one point, he was describing basically how he was subbing in and out and how he was taking Holly's perspective. And he started to take on for a moment Vecna's voice. So she said, I thought that everything was cut off. Didn't we cut everything off whenever we severed that connection? And essentially, he starts to take on Vecna, quote unquote's voice, meaning an evil voice started to come over his system, just to kind of give you an illusion. But I want you to keep note of that whenever we're rolling into the next 4 episodes. Okay, and the last one we're going to end with, and then we're going to go into the first sales question, is why Holly? So Holly, I believe, and I went into this in the first session, and then we're going to sub this up, and we're going to go into the first set of questions, or the first type of question. Holly is a shadow walker as well. So the reason that I believe this is in season 1, whenever Will was in the Upside Down, he essentially came over, he came to the wall, and he started reaching through the wall. It was either him or a Demogorgon, you don't know. And Holly, Will led her there through lights. And it was the first person and only person that essentially had some kind of communication with Will, even though she couldn't even speak words. So that power has been there the entire time. Will has had that power of true sight since he came back from the Upside Down, right? So he didn't know it and he didn't use it, which is what Vecna was counting on and basically laying into. Is he didn't know that he had that power. I believe that Holly also has Shadow Walker. She's a Shadow Walker, which means she can go into the Upside Down, she can go into Dimension X, and she can go into Hawkins. So where she is right now, which we're going to get into the next bucket, is she is currently in Vecna's mind in Dimension X with Max. That's why 11 can't find them. Of like, she's been looking, but where she's been looking, because her powers are limited to, is the Upside Down. But Vecna, where he is currently, and he's trapped Holly in his mind there, and that's where Max is as well, is the Upside Down. So Holly, it's very clear. At one point, Mike starts telling her about her powers, essentially. He's alluding to the figure, but what she is a cleric. So that means that essentially she can cast a spell of protection power, number 1. And also she can throw a door of basically a time portal door. So that's going to be very helpful within the next four episodes, because she can essentially cast a door where she can go through a wormhole. Like that's where Erica was in class, and the professor was talking about the different like wormholes, like why they're interesting is basically you can transport matter over time and space, like essentially without having to go the travel distance. So I believe one of my biggest predictions within that bucket is going to be that Holly still has to figure out that she has that power, number 1. Like that was a big question. Why take Holly? But she's had that power the entire time. Her and Will are the only 2 Shadow Walkers in the series. But essentially, I believe that she's going to cast a door within like once she realizes she has this power, she's going to cast a door within Vecna's mind and essentially transport her and Max both as now something that to mention, Mr. Clark said they're very unstable, which is going to be the truth. But essentially, she's going to try and transport her and Max, I believe, in the next 4 episodes out of Vecna's mind and back into Hawkins or the Upside Down, one of the two. Okay, that's bucket 1. Let's get into the first type of sales question. That was a long bucket, but I promise you they're going to get faster. I promise you. Okay, first type of sales question, strange sales question that reps ask. I'm going to do the most aggressive first. The first one that you can tell it makes me have heartburn, like even saying it, is a self-diagnosis question. So a self-diagnosis question, essentially what it is it's asking for the buyer's take, and it's anchoring to that take as truth. So, and that's extremely dangerous and also completely deletes the need for a seller, in my opinion. So an example of a self-diagnosis question is, what's the impact to you if we don't move forward? What's the root cause? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Even internal stuff of like, hey, what's the buying process internally? Who is the person that's going to fight against this deal? What do we need to change? When do we need to change it by? When you're asking someone, even what's your timeline of when you need to solve this by, you have to keep in mind you are asking their opinion. What is the timeline of which they need to solve this by? And then you're anchoring to that as the truth. So the biggest reason BANT bothers me, it's not because it's it's an outdated framework. Yes, I'll give it that. Like, I think it served the function that it should have at the time. IBM created BANT because they had too much business. And they wanted to, in the most effective way, get business away from surface to them the most buyer-ready business at the time. But essentially, it was, I have 1,000 people that need to buy. I can only like from a time perspective, I can only help 100 people buy. So how do I surface to the top the most 100 most buyer ready? But it was in an environment where there was too much business and they were trying to basically qualify people out. But the biggest reason that BANT bothers me is not that. It's not that it's offensive to the buyer, makes them feel like a number or, any of that, which is all true. It makes them feel like you're a seller, you're not out for their good, all very true. But the reason it really bothers me is it's anchoring your belief of what their budget is and what their timeline is, and what the authority level that they're willing to involve based on the problem that they know. When the whole point of a seller, from an ethical perspective too, is to find out what they don't know. What do they believe that's not true? And what have they missed, essentially? So in a Stranger Things analogy, people believe that Ted Wheeler is Nancy's father. I don't believe that's true. That's a misdiagnosis. Something people believe that's not correct. But something that they've missed is Dr. Brenner is Eleven's father as well, for instance. So both of those categories, anytime that you find out something that the buyer doesn't know, is essentially when you A, gain credibility, but B, you serve your function in the workplace. A seller, their whole role is mirrored to that of a doctor. Think of it as a doctor coming into, walking into the room and then asking the patient, what problem do you have? What condition do you have? What happens if you don't move forward to take a medication within the next 4 months? Is that going to hurt you? What are the ripple effects of that, on your home life? It's like, I don't know. That's why I came to you. The whole point of, and I hear a lot within the selling world of like, I need I really want credibility as a seller. Like, credibility, it's not acquired, it's built. And what that's built on is you find small pieces of information that they either didn't know, or that they have completely missed, or that they believe that wasn't true. And every single time you find one of those, the credibility is earned through that. Of like, each time you find one of those, and the bigger, the more hinged impacts, the better. is when you're going to, number one, you're going to create a bigger sale. Like they're going to spend budget and assign the timeline and assign the level of authority that they believe based on the problem that they know. But you have to keep in mind, they are completely aware, and in all objective reality, they are aware that they don't know things. That's what they're scared of. They're scared of, if I'm like 20% of your deals are lost to status quo, I don't think the problem's big enough. But 80% are lost to indecision, meaning I do think it's big enough, but I still don't buy anyway. And there are three things that people are scared of: that they have the wrong product, that there's too much information for them to get through, and the third one is outcome uncertainty. Even if I do have the right product and have the right information, I'm still not going to be able to get the outcome that I want to get. And you have to keep in mind, there's errors of commission and errors of omission. Errors of omission is status quo, essentially. There's a problem going on. What happens if I omit to do something and I'm gobbled up by a dragon on the back end? Like I don't do something. And this is where, like, quote unquote, I hate the words, it just makes me nauseous, but cost of inaction comes into play, of like, what happens if I don't move forward? And so sellers try to drill in there and say, like, let's drive that up. But the bigger fear is cost of action. What happens if I do move forward and I'm not successful? And so self-diagnosis questions, the reason they bother me so much is they are the most trumpeted by sales trainers like me. And they're like in a lot of sellers' heads, and I'm going to take the accountability for this and the responsibility for this. This is what's been shelled out for thousands and thousands of years, of like, if I'm like, what's the impact to you if you don't move forward? It's like, you should know. And if you don't know at least as much as me, but you don't know more than me, there is no upside to me sharing that information with you. You have to keep in mind, there's only downside for them to share that information with you. The more that I share that information with you, you can hold your pricing. You can send me annoying follow-up emails. You can say, I'm confused. Why haven't you moved forward? Remember, you said if you don't move forward by, whatever, December 6th, that you're going to get gobbled up by a Demogorgon. Why haven't you moved forward? Every single time that they part with that information, it increases their risk. You could go to their boss, you could go to their competitors. But like, if you take all of that away, which, to be very clear, it exists, but if you take all those reasons away, it's not worth it to them. If they don't get any result, if they don't find anything that they didn't know by giving you that information, there's just no point to it. So self-diagnosis questions, you're going to need a couple, I would say, near the beginning, of like, I need to know why the person came in. So patient walks in the doctor's office, even though they have a lot of information, they're like, what brings you in today? Because they want to know, like, what is the driving impact, essentially, that someone's trying to solve. The only thing that someone can't be wrong about is that they have a driving impact in their head that they want to solve for that's worth it. They can be wrong about everything else. How they think that they should solve for it is incorrect, or they've missed something. What the root cause is incorrect, or they missed something. A couple of impacts that are going to happen that they completely missed. Maybe they missed that it's solvable, or that can be solved by doing X, Y, and Z, or that they'll need X, Y, and Z to solve it. But that's the only thing they can't be wrong about, is that driving impact. So the only self-diagnosis question that I always recommend is, they come on the line. It's like, you look like someone who doesn't waste your time. You gave me 35 minutes today. I'm assuming it's because, hypothetically, you might have a problem in your head that you want to solve with us. Hypothetically, maybe with us. If you don't mind me asking, what's that problem? And they'll dive straight in, right? But past that, the more self-diagnosis questions that I'm asking, what's your timeline? Who did you want to involve in this decision? You have to keep in mind, you're asking them for their take, and then you're anchoring to that take. Where it's like, the expertise of a seller should be, hypothetically, if it's going to be worth it to the buyer to have us involved, which statistically speaking, it's not. Most of them don't want us involved because, in their experience, 82% of buyers don't want a seller involved. They just don't, because based on their experience, but 92% of buyers see the sales process as it's more important than the product itself. So people are like, why can't they, like, what do these two facts have to do with one another? Like, buyers need to make up their mind. It's like, no, we need to make up our mind on, are we going to be helpful? So the more that we can learn about the buyer persona's environment, statistics, industry averages, like, the root cause, at what point would a leading indicator be a root cause for a problem that they wouldn't know about? so it's like the more facts that I can learn about that, the more and more credibility I have, essentially like knowledge in the bank, the more and more worth it is for the buyer to spend time with me. If I don't have any of that knowledge, they don't want to spend any time with me, and they shouldn't. But the more that I know, the more that it can help them. So self-diagnosis questions are my biggest irk number one, because it's like, if we're hinging on everything they believe, here's my synopsis, and then we're going to transition to bucket two. If I'm like, what's the impact to you? And they tell me, and they're correct, or I, attach myself to that. Why didn't they just check out with CART? What was the damage? The reason people need a doctor, hypothetically, Min, can you put that question back on the board? I didn't see what the question was. But if we're just going to look at, okay, I know those questions always rub me the wrong way. Couldn't put my finger on it. Yes, Sarah. Yes. Everyone give it up for Sarah in the chat. Here's the wonderful thing. Like, I seriously want y'all to give it up for Sarah. Like, here's the wonderful thing. I want, if everyone can, to lean into your instincts more. Because we know that this is wrong. I know it. I know that because I hear it from people. They'll say, like, I don't want to be a jerk, or I don't want to be salesy, or I don't want to be pushy, or I don't want to be, but then they feel like they have to, right? And I'm going to take on that responsibility and accountability fully. That is our fault as trainers, is to give you another option to not feel salesy. Right. But it's like all of those questions of, like, if you ask me, what's the impact to you of not buying by June 5th or by December 5th? I'm like, hey, I get one bad word per session. I'm like, yo, jackass, leave that up to me. Okay. Like, what are you trying to remind me? You want me to say out loud to you, a stranger, reiterate what I already know? The reason I'm in the chair, and you have to keep in mind, it's a humbling chair for them to be in. It's not a fun chair to be in, of like, I have a problem. And the problem is around, I have a number that I need to hit, whether it doesn't matter what the number is. It's not just for sales buyer personas. If I'm an IT director, the number I need to hit is server uptime. If I'm CISO, and the number I need to hit is security breaches, right? But I have a number, CFO, it's going to be gross profit margin. I have a number, an assigned goal, and I'm not able to do that. That's a tough chair to be in. So if I'm asking them the stuff that they already know, it takes a lot for someone to come in and say, like, I have a problem and I need help with it. So our three responsibilities: number one, to study our butt off, to know enough to be able to diagnose, to ask the questions around the things that they normally like get wrong, so that we can find some doozies that they run into, and to find as many of those unknowns for them as we can. That is our job in sales. I hear the train of thought, and then I promise I'm going to go in bucket two. Sarah, it's your fault. You riled me up. If, like, our entire function is to find out these unknowns. And the wonderful thing of, like, if I just want to sell more, people are going to buy based on the size of the problem. So if you find 3 problems they didn't know about, all of a sudden, voila, the problem got bigger. So the amount of budget they're going to dole out is bigger. And the likelihood that they're going to go with you and that they're going to buy overall, their fear has decreased, that they won't be able to solve it, because now they have you, and now they figured out something that they didn't know. So they're more confident. So it's like influence, persuade, get them to realize something. These are all different terms that all mean the same thing. I'm trying to influence the buyer and make them think something. Not to make a horrible, cheesy analogy, but it's like, I think the same thing around Vecna. He, like, got into people's heads to make them believe something. He was trying to make Will believe that he was weak. But Will, in all reality, is stronger than him. So it's like, if we can just align ourselves to the buyer and say, I'm going to try and find as many things as they don't know, all of the metrics that we have from a self perspective of, like, quota, closing deals, booking meetings, all of that increases the more unknowns that we find. So whoever doesn't want the ring is the one who holds the ring. So it's like, if you're not after manipulating them or getting them to realize something, or the horrible cost of inaction selling of like, I'm going to make them calculate out in front of me. Think how sick this is. I'm going to make them calculate out in front of me what happens to them if they don't move forward, because if they say it out loud, then they're going to be more scared. I'm like, good God, can we put these tactics down for a second? Can we just think about our buyer and say, what's good for them? Instead of thinking, how do I manipulate them into realizing that they should buy? Try and understand, should they even buy to begin with? Maybe the answer is no. And the minute that we take up that buyer's perspective, like, again, horrible, cheesy analogy, but like Will, the strength of him is he was taking on the perspective of a bunch of different people. All of a sudden I'm a Demogorgon. All of a sudden I'm all of a sudden I'm Vecna. All of a sudden I'm Holly. All of a sudden I'm Derek the Delightful. Every single time that we have that perspective of their perspective is when it makes it easier to quote unquote influence them. But the reason it's powerful at that point is because if I have the perspective of them, I only want to do things that help them. Meaning find things that they don't know of how to solve the problem, whether that means them buying or not. The minute that we have that vision and that we have that agenda is the minute that we earn the right to potentially be able to diagnose. Now, if we've learned the information or not about their buyer persona, that's when we have the skill to be able to do it. Just because I want to help them doesn't mean that I can, net. But like that's the ticket to play, is like my agenda is how do I help them find something that they don't know? That's when I've done my job as a seller. Okay. Bucket 2, Stranger Things bucket 2. I'm going to go faster. All of this is Sarah's fault. I'm just joking. Okay. Bucket 2. This bucket is annoying because I called it the I told you so's. Okay, so here's a couple of things that we covered in the last session, but I'm going to give a lot of them were progressed. So a couple of things that we covered in the last session were relationships. So I'm going to blow up a couple of them and just show you kind of where they progressed in season 5. So long and the short of it, I don't believe that Nancy Wheeler, that her father is Ted Wheeler. I believe that her father is actually Dr. Brenner. And that Henry Wheeler, Henry, that I'm totally blanking on his name, not Ives, Henry, someone help me out. Henry, but Creel, there it is. Henry Creel, that his father is not Victor Creel, it's Dr. Brenner. So Dr. Brenner, 8, Nancy, and 11, all 4 of them have Dr. Brenner essentially as a father. The rest of the kids in the lab, essentially, they only had Henry's blood. Another relationship to think about is that Dr. Brenner, the reason that he's in the game is his father was the one that went on the USS Eldridge. Like essentially his father is the first one who went to Dimension X. So Dr. Brenner was carrying out this entire mission to honor his father and like his life's mission. Another one that we went into was that Murray is a Russian spy, I believe. And I believe that Ted Wheeler is a U.S. spy. So I wanted to just kind of lay a couple of those facts of before I go into how they progress. So essentially, you've seen Murray a couple of times in the season 5 have the same traits as Yuri, which was the Russian smuggler on the opposite end. So the reason I'm laying these out is there is a big theme in Stranger Things of good versus bad. But here's the thing. They're all intermixed with one another, meaning everyone has a good side and everyone has a bad side. And everyone sees the other person as the bad person and their side is the good side of like, I'm doing these things for my reasons, which we're going to get into in the next bucket. I'm doing these things for my reasons. But I'm the good guy and you're the bad guy. If like hypothetically, we would have said Yuri, the Russian smuggler, was the bad guy, right? He tried to manipulate Joyce and he tried to, But then you start seeing a setup of, I believe that Murray was a Russian spy, but then essentially started to take the perspective of the team. So he basically transitioned over, but you're seeing him use a lot of the exact same lines that Yuri used. And you also see him. He gave over the one item that Yuri constantly gave over within season 3, which was peanut butter. He started feeding peanut butter to all the kids and gave boppers over to Steve. So I think that there's a theme that's cooking up there. The next thing that we talked about was Back to the Future. So one of my predictions and all of my nerdy wisdom was Back to the Future was going to come back in season 5. And boy, oh boy, do we see it come back. So a couple of the ones that you might have missed was Back to the Future. They use the line Great Scott a lot. 88 miles per hour was represented a couple of times. The term flux capacitor was used a couple of times. The DeLorean, how it looks, is the exact same car model as what they use in Back to the Future. And one of the things that you might have missed is there was a sign that Eleven and Hopper were hiding behind, essentially, whenever they first started using the hedgehog that they call Sonic. It's basically a sonic beam. And they hid behind basically the Turnbow Family Realty poster. That was a callback to in Back to the Future 2 when Marty McFly and Doc meet up and start to exchange currencies. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is I believe there's going to be a big reveal in the next 4 seasons. I believe something is going to happen at the main library where you saw Vecna essentially affect Will with Dimension X. It is underneath you guessed it, clock tower. So I think that the ultimate showdown is going to be at that library in front of that clock tower, because it's going to be a shout out back to the Future. Okay, the last one within this category that I wanted to go into was a hive mind. So there is a hive mind. This is going to be a wild theory, but I really think it's going to become true. And if it is, I want everyone to say I'm sorry in the chat. Okay? I'm sorry to me. I know that it sounds crazy. Okay. So, and then we're going to get into heavy things. So there's a hive mind, that's clear. And what a hive mind is essentially is all of those like essentially vines that are spreading out among Hawkins. They were spreading out in the Upside Down and they infected the Upside Down. They're an extension of the Mind Flayer. So the Mind Flayer is the bad guy. Vecna's not the bad guy, which is going to be a part of the big reveal in the end. Vecna's not the bad guy. The Mind Flayer is. Vecna's just a tool. And his real name is Henry, which Will calls out. His real name is Henry. So Henry at one point was good. But essentially, all of these things are just tools, essentially. So the hive mind, the strength of a hive mind, is based on how well it communicates with each other. So this is a negative hive mind of like, you're touching one piece of hive mind. You're touching, well, what they said is you're touching Vecna. You're not touching Vecna. You're touching the Mind Flayer, essentially is what you're touching. But that hive mind is spreading and spreading and spreading and spreading and spreading. I believe there's going to be a second hive mind, but it's a positive hive mind. You have to keep in mind, everything is mirrored onto one another, meaning there is a counterparty to everything within Stranger Things. So the positive hive mind, I believe, mark my words, is going to be how well do all of these kids interact and talk to one another. And the reason I believe that is you'll notice throughout the series that there's always like 5 different things going on all across the world. But somehow they still communicate with one another. So the strength of the hive mind essentially is based on 2 things: the spread of the vines, how far out are they from one another, and how well do they communicate. So how they've communicated so far is walkie-talkies. And you'll notice anytime that a character is starting to, and this is going into one of the stronger themes that's represented in the series, anytime that one of the characters is hiding something, they start to go dark on the walkie-talkies. But them talking back and forth and collaborating together, you also saw in episode 3 of season 5 that all the kids, when they came in and did that Home Alone setup trap within the house to catch the Demogorgon, essentially they were working together really pristinely. So one of the themes that's going to come out, I believe, later is that the only thing that can hurt a friendship, or the only thing that can hurt a relationship eternally, is when you stop talking. So Steve and Dustin have always had a great relationship. They've always talked and talked and talked and been super good friends. When he came back from camp, Steve was the only one, who greeted him, essentially. But then in season 5, you see Dustin start to shut down. So every single one of these characters has had some kind of arc where at one point they were going through something, and they were hiding something, so they stopped talking to the group. And that is to the detriment, quote unquote, of the hive mind. So I think that the positive analysis, the positive mirror to this is going to be how well does everyone communicate? And you saw in season 5, all of a sudden, Dustin and Steve, I thought it was a little bit on the nose for the Duffer Brothers. They started fighting a lot because they didn't see each other's perspective, because they didn't listen to each other, and they misunderstood what had happened. Steve was like, "Why'd you miss the crawl?" And it's because Dustin was getting the crap beat out of him by all the popular kids. And then Dustin is like, "Steve, how'd you mess this up?" Neither one of them had talked to each other. Both of them got in a fight. Neither one of them heard each other's perspective. And all of a sudden, Jonathan was like, "Hey, can y'all shut up?" And he said, "I like his suggestion. Why don't we just stop talking?" That is going to be the kryptonite for the group, is when they stop talking to one another. So Joyce, you want to be talking with Hopper, you want to be talking with 11, you want to be talking with everyone. So the positive representation of the hive mind that's going to be a strength of the group, which is going to come out, I think, in the next 4 episodes, is going to be the group working as one organism. Because you have to keep in mind, the biggest thing the Mind Flayer wants, what the Mind Flayer does is he flays minds, but he flays them individually. So he tries to get everyone to hate everyone by feeding different truths and getting them to shut down to one another so that they join his army, so that he can infect one by one by one by one by one. The positive antithesis to that is Joyce. So Joyce in the beginning is the only one that truly believes that Will is still alive. And everyone doesn't believe her because it's hard to believe. And then all of a sudden, Jonathan starts to believe. And then all of a sudden, Hopper starts to believe. And then all of a sudden, Steve starts to believe. And then Nancy starts to believe. And then Mike starts to believe. And Lucas starts to believe. But each one of them, you see them in a really weird position when they're like, I have to say something out loud that is really not believable, right? So like Hopper has to be like, I think that there might be the upside down, it might exist. Nancy has to be like, I think that there's some kind of weird alien creature that took Barb. Jonathan has to say, like, I think that my mom might be right, and my brother is in the walls or in the lights. And each one of these characters, and you see it like an interesting intersection in season 3, is when season 2 is when Max joins, quote unquote, the group, and Lucas tries to tell her the entire story. And she's like, she basically says, she's like, I liked it, but it was a bit slow at points. And he's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, you're telling a scary story, right? Because she doesn't believe him, because it's hard to believe. But you see one by one by one by one by one, the group is slowly won over of like, oh, now Max believes, now Robin believes, now Erica believes, now each one of these parties is taken over to, quote unquote, the good side. So the antithesis to the Mind Flayer is essentially going to have to be something that counters it. So the Mind Flayer doesn't flay everyone's mind at once. It flays one by one by one by one by one. Vecna, or like Henry at first, and then I'm going to capture like it, and it's someone who's been offended by the bigger group of like, I want to be won over to this essential site. So it's been a gradual crawl into Hawkins. It hasn't been all at once, which is essentially how fighting happens. So the antithesis, the positive antithesis to that is, do I believe someone, and do I give them the benefit of the doubt, and do I hear them out and not just launch at them of like, I can't believe it. So you'll see, which again, we're going to get into the next session of like, when someone's trying to come out with something of like something that you wouldn't believe, like Eddie's trying to say, for instance, he's like, hey, Chrissy was sucked up into air and then all her bones were crushed and I didn't have anything to do with it. And the reason she was in my trailer is because one of the most popular cheerleaders who had never done drugs before was over at my house because she wanted something harder than weed. That's a hard truth to say to someone. And it's a hard truth like for anyone to believe, because why would you? So like Jason, her boyfriend, is basically like, Eddie's Satan, Hellfire is a cult. We need to kill all of them and we need to find them. Right. And every single time you have one of those parties not understanding, it's like you start to see a fight happening. So that is kind of the seeds that have been thrown down by the Duffer Brothers, is like every single time that one of these parties is fighting with one another and they don't make a resolution. So you'll notice, and I'm going to say this and then I promise I'm in transition, their big line is like, friends don't lie. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Every single one of them has lied multiple times to the group. So their big thing is like friends don't lie. But the point the Duffer Brothers trying to get across is like friends don't lie hypothetically, but when they do, they have to just come back to each other and apologize. Lucas calls Eleven a traitor in the beginning. And they're like, she can levitate stuff. And he's like, you're completely, there's no way that can happen. But then at the end of season 1, Lucas, it's a really heartwarming moment, comes over to Eleven and says, I'm sorry about all that stuff I said that you were a traitor. And her response isn't like, you're a jackass and thanks for the apology. Her response is, yeah, but friends don't lie, and I manipulated the compasses. So like that is the bond that's being built, is like the positive antithesis, the positive hive mind is going to be based on how well does that group talk to one another, in essence, even as far spread out as they are. And when there is some kind of break, how much they apologize to like mend that barrier. Okay, bucket number 2 of question, sales question. I promise the buckets are going to get faster. Okay, second type of question that's strange. I'm going to be nice and say strange, is a subjective question. So what a doctor needs to diagnose is objective data points. So the difference between a sign and a symptom is a symptom is always noticed by the patient, and it is based on pain. It's based on a feeling. And it's always noticed by the patient first. A sign is objective and noticed by the doctor first, and it's objective. So the difference between subjective and objective is basically the entrance or removal of feeling from it. So an example would be, we have a really horrible open rate. An objective data point would be, what is the open rate? So what a doctor needs to diagnose, what a seller needs to diagnose, is objective data points. So subjective questions are asking a buyer a question. They're ridiculous when you think about them, with a subjective term in there. Do you have a low open rate? Do you have a lot of emails bounce? Are you missing quota by a lot? It's like, I don't know. What, like, if I say, do you have a low open rate? I don't know. What's low? It means that the buyer basically has to interpret whatever, like an adjective or an adverb that you're using, to their interpretation or definition of that, and give their answer based on that. Do you have good emails? I don't know. What does that mean? And they're going to say, yes, I have good emails, because based on their perspective, they do. If you wanted to go after that, it's like, I don't know, what do you mean by good emails? It's like, maybe you mean length, maybe you mean response rate, maybe you mean booked meetings rate. So subjective questions is going to be asking the buyer anything, and the goal is always the same, is how do I manipulate this person? How do I get this person to admit that they have a problem so I can sell to them? So it's like, even if you see the profile questions, like, we work with people who have low open rates, terrible connect rates, or they can't, or their team is missing quota by a lot, long sales cycle, low close one percentages, any of that. If you ask your buyer, A, they know where you're going, but B, even if you weren't going there, even if you did have their best intention in mind of like, I want to help this person, you have to keep in mind, if I ask a person, do you have low open rates? And they say yes, I still have nothing as a doctor. I still can't diagnose anything. If I'm going to diagnose, let's say, email deliverability problems, anything below a 50% open rate, and I know they have a deliverability problem, 15 to 25% is industry average for open rates. But anything below 50 and they have a deliverability problem, if they don't have a deliverability problem, let's say that they have DKIM, DMARC, SPF all set up, and they said that they have a 65% open rate, I'm like, okay, well, now it's a quality issue. If you don't have a deliverability problem, it's only 59% of the emails are actually making it to the primary inbox. So the point is, if I ask them, do you have a low open rate? Or they said, we have a low open rate, and I didn't get them to define it, it means that I have no actual definition of like objective data point to do anything with. So they know this, they realize this, and so they shut down because they know where you're going. Like, that would be a quote unquote bad question from a diagnostic perspective. A good question and a bad question, I want to redefine what the definitions of those are. A good question is one that helps me get, it's not even, a good question is not one that gets them to realize something or blah, blah, blah. it's one that it gets me a lot of data points that I'm able to find a lot of misdiagnosis for them. That's a good question. So if I ask a question that I'm like, can you walk me through your outbound process today? And they give me 100 different data points. That was a good question. Why? Because I can probably do something with 75 of those data points. Or if I ask a question, I'm like, what's your open rate, for instance? And they're like, it's 12. I'm like, you have an email deliverability problem for sure. That I'm like, I would have to ask more questions, but I'm like, they likely don't have DKIM, DMARC, SPF. They don't have a custom tracking link set up. They're probably sending over 50 emails per day. They don't rotate domains. They don't warm up their inbox. Their data hygiene quality is probably, their data decay is probably about 2.9% per month. They probably haven't, put any enrichment services in there. Like, that's all what I'm guessing. But giving me the data point of 12%, I'm like, without doubt, they have an email deliverability problem for sure. It's not all quality. That's a good question. Why? Because it helps me find a misdiagnosis one-to-one. A bad question is one that doesn't help me do either of those. So if I said, did you have a low open rate? And they're like, yes, we do. Let's go for a second and say that they agree with you, which they're not going to, because they're not stupid. They're like, okay, yes, we do. I can't do anything with that. So the reason, there's usually one condition, or there's one habit that causes a lot of conditions for a patient, which is why a doctor asks for it constantly. They're like, let's see if anyone can guess it in the chat. There's usually one daily habit that some people have. It's a bad habit, one would argue, that causes a lot of problems for people from a medical perspective. It's linked to a lot of diseases, a lot of conditions, a lot of, different cancer types. And so doctors ask about, let's see if anyone can guess it in the chat. Maybe they can, maybe they won't, or maybe I've just lost everyone because I talked about Stranger Things for too long. But there's one negative habit that people usually have. I'm going to give everyone 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So the negative habit is usually, I think I'm on a 30-second delay, so it wouldn't work anyway. But the negative habit usually is smoking. So the patient walks in and they're like, and the doctor asks, do you smoke? And they say, yeah, but only just a little. The doctor doesn't stop there. They start to ask questions on what's a little. They're like, how many per day? Or like, yeah, but just a little. And I quit. I only did it for a little bit and I quit a while ago. I have something there, but I still don't have any data points that I can do anything with. Just a little might be enough to cause a condition that they don't know about. And that's the point of the doctor. So they're like, how many is just a little? How many did you smoke per day? You said that you only smoked for a little while. How long did you smoke? When did you quit? Why did you quit? How many bouts of it have you had? And the reason they want that objective information is it helps them understand, like, is there something that this person doesn't know? The only value of a doctor is to find things that that person doesn't know, right? Of like, they have self-diagnosed, they think that they have a certain condition and they're incorrect because of some fact. That's because the doctor has an expertise. And that hypothetically is the only value of a seller. So anytime that you're using any, and I hear it in every single value prop, I kid you not, they're like ineffective processes. I'm like, what does that mean? I'm like, what does that mean? Like, is it time lapse? Is it, amount of locations that they have to log in? What's the result of that? Like, you have to ask questions. The questions have to be easily answered by your prospect. So if I say, do you have good emails or bad emails? They don't know how to answer that. And even if they did, they're going to give me their interpretation, which the whole point of the conversation is to find out things that they didn't know. So I can't get their quote unquote take. I need the objective actual data points to figure out what my take is based on their and see if that's different from their take so I can save them from something. So the question number 2, strange question number 2. And the reason that it will destroy your conversion rates right off the bat is because it's going to shut the buyer down. All these questions, they're going to know where you're going, and it's going to shut the buyer down. Do you have good open rates? Do you have bad open rate? Do you have high blank? Do you have high churn? Do you have a lot of churn? It's like, what's a lot? The way that I could ask that is, what's your churn rate? Or do you have a churn rate of 80% or above? Either one of those. I would say, what's your churn rate is going to be the most effective, because at least it gives me a whole number there. So the second worst question is going to be subjective questions. Okay, bucket number 3. We're going to start to speed up. I know we're an hour, so I'm going to start to speed up. Okay, bucket 3 is history. So, of Stranger Things. So, history. There was a lot of history in that season 5. And this is an equip, basically the history between the group. Everyone went to school together. Karen Wheeler went to school together with Ted Wheeler, with Joyce, with Hopper, with Alan Munson, which is linked to Eddie, obviously Eddie Munson, and with Henry. They all went together to school together at the same time. Henry wasn't bad in the beginning, quote unquote. He essentially moved to Nevada with his parents. And he accidentally was looking around at some stuff. He was in the Boy Scouts. So you saw that Holly took on the telescope. That was for when he was in the Boy Scouts. And he went into some caves one day, and he essentially accidentally touched some random equipment that was left there by the one, like when the Dr. Brenner's father came back on the USS Eldridge, there was one Russian scientist that came with him. The Russian scientist stole a whole bunch of equipment and basically ran away. And essentially he died, and he left that equipment in a cave. Henry comes walking along, touches that equipment, and went to Dimension X and got the Mind Flayer put into his blood. But the reason that that's an important event is because that was the point in time where Henry essentially lost his innocence. So that's why you saw that Henry was so afraid of those caves. It's the one thing that he's afraid of. And I'm going to go into the history of why he, quote unquote, turned and became bad in a second. But essentially, when he was looking at those caves with Max knows what she was doing, is because he was seeing those caves, because you have to keep in mind, that is a world of Henry's memories. Right. So when he came up to those caves, he saw the point at which he accidentally and very innocently touched some equipment and went to Dimension X and had the Mind Flayer put into his blood. So he was scared of that moment. He was angry at that moment, because he was like, that was the point where he essentially was transported to Dimension X, and where all this weird stuff started happening to him that no one else understood and demonized him for. So essentially, within high school, Joyce was putting on a play, and there was a bunch of people who were in that play. And so Karen Wheeler was in that play. I can't remember her last name at that point. Henry was in that play. Hopper was in that play. Alan Munson was in that play. And also who's in that play is Patty Newby. So who Patty Newby is you might remember Bob Newby, Radio Shack Bob's. It's his half-sister. So the reason it's important is, or the reason it's a half-sister is Bob, he essentially shared a Radio Shack Rob or Radio Shack Bob. Now I'm second guessing myself. Radio Shack Bob. So he essentially shared a father with his sister Patty. So his father, Radio Shack Bob, is white. His half sister was half black. So they shared a father who's the principal of Hawkins High. But her mother was Ella Fitzgerald. She didn't know who her mother was at the time. So who Ella Fitzgerald is, for anyone who doesn't recognize the song, is Dream Another Dream of Me, which is the song that Victor Creel hears and basically, brings him back and haunts him. That is who sings that song. So essentially, Patty and Henry Creel, which again, Radio Shack Bob's half-sister, and Henry Creel fell in love together. And essentially, as part of that love, Henry wanted to find who Patty's mother was, because she didn't know. She knew that her father, had slept with a student, and she knew that her mother was black, but that's all she knew. And so Henry essentially went into the void and tried to search through Dimension X because her mother had died, and tried to find who her mother was, but it was out of love, and it was something that was completely innocent. So he went into the attic with Patty, essentially. He levitated, and he went to find her. And at that point, Patty's father and Victor Creel, Henry's quote unquote father, but I think it's Dr. Brenner, came into the attic and saw him levitating and thought it was something demonic, just like Jason when he came into the attic and saw Max levitating. And Lucas was like, dude, I can't wake her up. You don't know what this is. This is not demonic. And it was all the truth, but it was hard to believe. So Jason he's like, basically get Max down or I'm going to kill you, which was the same reaction by both Victor Creel and Patty's father. So essentially they start to try to prevent it from happening. And they get both wrapped to the walls, and Patty goes to get Henry back. But the way that she does it is she starts telling him that she loves him, which essentially is mirrored to when Mike starts telling Eleven when she's basically in Dimension X with Vecna in season 4, and she's getting wrapped up by the vine, or season 3 or 4, I think it's 4, it's 4, getting wrapped up by the vines, that Mike starts telling Eleven that she loves, or that he loves her. And that the reason that he wasn't able to say it is because he was afraid of losing her. When he says that, Eleven comes back, snaps Vecna, snaps the powers of Vecna off of her, just like what happened with Patty and Henry. So Patty tells Henry in the attic at that point, hey, I love you. You have to come back. I love you. I love you. I love you. So Henry comes back. So essentially, there was a play that was happening November 6th, 1959. Henry was starring in it, and it was Joyce's play. Henry was starring in it with Patty Newby. But essentially, long story short, it didn't happen. And Henry believed that Joyce was against him, which she wasn't. But he misunderstood something that she said, because she said, hey, I know everything that's happened. And he thought it was about the attic. So at that point, a couple of things happened. He was all of a sudden against Joyce, and he all of a sudden couldn't have a relationship with Patty. So why that matters is when you saw that playbill, it said November 6, 1959. That is basically the day that Henry flipped to the Mind Flayer. He was like, no one here understands me. Everyone here thinks I'm different. My mom is ashamed of me. He didn't realize his mom was ashamed of him because because he was Dr. Brenner's son, not Victor Creel's, and she couldn't come out with that. So he was like, everyone's ashamed of me. Nobody wants me. Nobody loves me. So I'm going to flip to the bad guy, the Mind Flayer, because at least the Mind Flayer will play ball with me. At least the Mind Flayer loves me. So Henry was once good. And that's going to be really important when we're going to go into the big reveal, which we're going to get into very shortly. Henry was once good, and he essentially loved Patty. Patty is still alive. I believe that Patty is Miss Kelly, who's the therapist, who essentially talks to Max and the kid that works in the newspaper with Nancy and Chrissy, the 3 patients. She doesn't talk to the 4th, which is Patrick, which is the guy on Jason's basketball team who levitates. Essentially, I believe that she doesn't talk to him because I believe that that's her son, which is even spicier, which I believe is all going to come out in the next 4 episodes. But essentially, that is the history behind them. So one of those cases that it comes to deck that was really important is you'll see Joyce in the 4th episode of season 5. Joyce gets up, and to Vecna, it's so cute. Joyce is like, don't take him. And I'm like, Joyce, Vecna, truly, I watch a lot of horror. I've seen all 10 Saws, for instance. I watch a lot of horror. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I've seen it. All of The Hills Have Eyes, even though they're garbage movies, all renditions of it, I've seen it. And Vecna truly is one of the scariest creatures. I'm like, hats off to the Duffer Brothers. Vecna is one of the scariest creatures that I have ever seen. Especially when he puts his veins through that military guy's eyes. I literally gawked. literally gawked. And Joyce stands up to him because he's about to go after Will. And Joyce, in all her grandeur, steps up and she was like, don't you take him. Don't you take him. And it's a very important point because The reason that Henry took Will is he's still pissed at Joyce. He thinks that Joyce was a part of the team that was trying to essentially chase him out with sticks. So there's a moment. If you go back and look at that point in the episode, there's a moment where Joyce looks back or looks at him and she's like, don't you take him, stay away from him. It's because they both know each other. Henry knows Joyce. Joyce knows who Henry is. Keep in mind, also, Karen Wheeler, when she says, stay away from my daughter, she's not as dumb as she thinks because Karen also knew Henry. Henry knew Karen. Karen was bad guy and from Henry's perspective. Karen was bad guy. Joyce was bad guy because they're on the side that's chasing me out of the town, even though I've done nothing wrong, just like Eddie was chased out of the town when he had done nothing wrong. And so when she says, stay away from my son, that was a very intimate moment because they both knew who each other was. And there was two pieces of that. First of all, she already knew him. But the second of all, when a character already knows someone in this series, they don't kill him. They just throw him to the side. So you see her throw Joyce to the side, but he doesn't kill her. Why? Because there's some history there. So it's a very, very important topic. Okay. See, I told you I was going to speed up. Third question, type of question. Okay. Third type of strange question is digital questions. Digital questions are asking digitally, does a buyer have a problem? Yes or no? Do you have a problem with low open rates, long sales cycles? And the reason that it's asked is the goal is to get the buyer to say yes so that you can sell to them. So sorry, I'm trying not to cover up my Stranger Things logo. So a digital question is basically just asking the buyer if they have a problem, yes or no. Do you struggle with low open rates? Do you struggle with hitting quota? Do you have a problem with poor connect rates? I'm like, there's so many problems with that question. It's a leading question. It's a subjective question. What does poor mean? And it's a digital question. But these questions are simply asking your buyer, do you have a problem with? Because your goal is to sell. So your goal is to get them to say yes. So the goal is, if they say yes, then I can vend them my product, which if you're trying to sell something, I'll give it to you. You just need, do you have that problem? But that's the problem. If you're trying to solve something, you're going to need to know a lot more information. What's the root cause? And you can't ask them. You can't say, what's the root cause? What's the impact? I'm trying to ask questions to understand what's the impact to them if they don't solve this. What do they need to change to solve it? What are the leading indicators they need to look at? What are the leading indicators they need to change and by how much? What are the products that they're going to need to be able to do that? What are the things they're going to need to think about when they deploy it? Because my goal is to solve it. If my goal is to sell, then it would be hypothetically be like, do you have a problem with not being able to hit quota? They're like, yes. And you're like, cool, because I can sell to that. And again, the reason it shuts the reason it's a terrible question, in my opinion, is because it doesn't help you diagnose. But the reason that it kills conversion rates is because it telecasts to your buyer from the beginning, I have no interest in helping you. I have no interest in solving your problem. I have no interest of being of any value. I don't probably know anything. That's what you're telling your buyer is I'm not going to be helpful to you in solving this problem, even if I have the information to. I'm not going to be helpful in solving this problem because my goal is to sell you. So, and you'll hear it. It's very interesting when you hear this on cold calls, because I listen to a lot of the quote unquote success stories that trainers like me put online. We're like, we want to teach you how to sell. We want to teach you how to cold call. So they put a cold call online and their success is always based on one thing I've noticed. The trend is what they deem as successful is that the prospect laughs at their joke at the beginning. Is they're like, do you want to roll the dice or do you just want to hang up now? And they're like, ha, ha, ha. And they're like, see, this is a good cold call. I'm like, okay, but what comes next? What's the question afterwards? Even let's say for a second, I'll go with you for a second, that it broke down their barriers. Not that I think that that's necessary, but let's say that they laugh at your mediocre joke. You get through that, and then what? What question do you ask next? If you ask a digital question, they'll say, do you, and it's so interesting because you'll hear it on the call. They're like, do you struggle with low open rates? Do you struggle with long sales cycle? Do you struggle with low conversion rates? Or are you going to tell me that everything's perfect for the person, which is completely leading, and they know what's happening at that point. But even if they say yes, every once in a while, I'll hear the person say, yeah, we do. And the seller's like, uh, they don't know where to go because they're like, oh, well, they just said, yeah. So do you want to buy? Like, I guess would be the next logical progression. You have to keep in mind, to solve a problem, you're going to need to ask a lot of things, a lot of things. You're going to need to know their entire, to solve any problem for them, certainly complex. People spend a lot of money to solve complex problems. To solve a complex problem, there's a lot of moving pieces that I need to know, regardless of the buyer persona. Of like, if I'm an IT director, if I'm selling to an IT director, let's do non-sales for a second. And it's like they're measured on server uptime. The first thing that I need to know, if like they need to solve a problem around server uptime, the first thing I need to know is what is their current server uptime and what is the goal of their server uptime, and what hypothetically I need to know the industry average of the server uptime. So it's like, let's say that they're at industry average is 99 and 3/9. If I don't know that as a seller, then it's like, why are they having a conversation with me? So it's like the first thing I would need to know is what is their goal internally? Let's say it's 99 and 2/9. The second thing I would need to know is what is their current server uptime? So if they say it's 92, then I'm like, uh-oh, that is a big problem. And I'm not salivating at that point. There's a very good litmus test that you are after your buyer's good or not after your buyer's good. If they say I'm in pain and you start to say, yeah, that means you're not after their own good. When they tell me their server uptime is 92, I'm like, yikes. That is my response as a problem solver, like someone who's trying to help them solve the problem. So if they tell me let's say I'm selling to a CFO and their lagging indicator is gross profit margin. If I say, what's your gross profit margin goal internally? And they're like 25%. And I'm like, where are you at? And they say 9. If my response, which usually a seller who's just trying to sell them wouldn't even ask those 2 data points. Well, let's say that they did. If I'm just trying to sell them, you'll see the seller get pumped because they're like, a lot of pain means my buyer is going to buy. And I'm like, it already disqualifies you from trying to help them solve it. Right off the bat, is you are not after their own good. You are excited when they are in pain. Instead of being excited when they're in pain, we need to be excited when we help them solve it successfully. That's when we need to be pumped. When I hear their server uptime is 92%, it's like my body goes into like panic mode, that I'm like, that is a massive draw. What if I was talking to someone from CrowdStrike or Cloudflare recently, or Southwest Airlines, and I see in the market of like everyone is lost and stranded. I'm not like, hell yeah, we can sell them a big system. It's like, holy crap, this thing has happened to this person. Their perspective is like, this is awful. So our perspective needs to be, this is awful. Let me help them solve it as much as I can. It's kind of like if, let's say, Robin had joined the crew and she's like, awesome, Vecna's super strong, right? It's like we need to join their perspective is I need to solve this problem. Our perspective and our goal needs to be one and the same with them, but our skill set needs to be complementary of like they were thinking that they need to, let's keep the theme going. They were thinking when they're in the Russian jail that they need to use a gun to take down a Demogorgon, which that's not going to work. It's got to be fire. So we're like, okay, why do you think it's a Demogorgon? First off, it's like, I got to figure out what they're fighting. But then I'm like, what's the ammo that you're using? I don't ask them the self-diagnosis question of, is the ammo that you're using correct? And that it's going to take down that Demogorgon? That's a self-diagnosis question. They'd be like, yeah, dipshit. Like sorry, I used 2 bad words. Sorry, mom. Yeah, if I thought it was wrong, I wouldn't be using it. The question I should ask instead is, How are you thinking about attacking? What's the ammo that you have to take down that Demogorgon that you're planning on using? They're like, this awesome gun. And I'm like, yeah, is that it? And they're like, uh-huh. And they'll look excited. Why? Because they think that that's the solution. And I'm like, well, interesting. And they're like, what's interesting? I'm like, well, statistically speaking, 100% of Demogorgons in the past have only been able to be taken down by fire. Do you have any kind of fire-related weapon? Do you have a match? Do you have gasoline? Do you have a stick? Do you have a shirt to tie onto the end of it? Yeah, it's like it's like, show me what's the ammo that you're planning on using. Why? Because they're going to run out on that field and they're going to be like, no sleep till Brooklyn. And they think that they can take it down, but they're wrong. And it's like, that is the value of a seller, is before they run into that situation, every time that I see a buyer in pain, every time that I see something erupt in the market, and everyone wants to sell to them that, and they're like, awesome, they're in a lot of pain. I'm like, first of all, you clearly don't give a crap about your buyer because you're excited about their pain. But second of all, when I look at that, the sales mindset on that, I don't see anything necessarily bad. When I look at that, I see a complete misunderstanding of what buyers are trying to do and why sales should exist to begin with. Our job should be to find out something before it happens to the buyer. That it's like the impact, it's like anyone can come in afterwards and try to sell fire to a whole bunch of people that were stuck in a Russian jail that were trying to take down Demogorgon after they're dead. But the real seller comes in beforehand and is like, I want to help you before you run into this impact. I don't want to have to wait for you to run into this impact. If nothing else, that's no sellers are there. Second, so you have no competition. Second thing is that's where you're going to win credibility and drastically increase your conversion rates. The third thing is from the ethical perspective. I don't want to wait for them to have to run into that negative reality before I enter the equation. Okay, that is a strange question number 3. Bucket 4 for Stranger Things topics. You know what, guys? I'm having a blast. I hope y'all are having fun too. Thanks for showing up to this. Thanks for even, like, I understand this might be a weird topic. This might be a weird thing, but I've been so into this series and no one ever lets me talk about what I really want to talk about. Everyone's like, be you online and, talk about the stuff you want to talk about. I'm like, yeah, but the stuff I want to talk about is nerdy. Very, very appalling for a 39-year-old female. Okay. So I just want to thank everyone for being online. Okay. The 4th bucket. I promise you bucket 5 and 6 are very short. Bucket 4 I'm going to keep it as short as I can. I really am. Okay. Bucket 4. One of the major, people are making a lot of predictions about Stranger Things. And the reason that I think that it's not that they're dumb or they're bad or whatever, is not the reason they can't get it right. I think the theme is missed, meaning the whole point. The whole point of the series is you have some things that are strange, but you have some things that are stranger. But I think what people look at as stranger is not the stranger thing. Instead of comparing myself to someone or being like, I did this bad thing, but they did something worse. Instead of thinking that, it's like, how do I just understand someone, put the guilt and blame down, stop trying to attack everyone, and just understand what they're doing? The stranger world out of all 3 of these is not Dimension X, and it's not the Upside Down. The stranger creatures are not the Demogorgons. They're not the creepy bats. It's not the Mind Flayer. The stranger world is Hawkins, and that those people think that they're good. You have to keep in mind, all those people in Hawkins, I'm not saying anyone's malevolent, but there are a lot of actions that are done in that world alone that were pretty negative. Again, they try to kill Eddie for nothing. They're trying to beat the crap out of Dustin and kill him in season 5. Why? Because he has a Hellfire shirt on. Why? Because he's supporting Eddie and the Hellfire wasn't a cult. But they don't understand any of that. Instead of asking questions, they're like, off with his head. They killed a snake and then rubbed blood all over a grave. Like, that's strange, right? So the biggest theme throughout this series, that I would say the overarching theme, which we're going to go into a couple examples, is quote unquote good versus bad, and how that's all relative and based on your perspective, and that we all have the nature of that we can be good and that we can be bad. So the best example of that, if you'll go throughout the series, there are two colors, red and blue. Every single scene, what everyone is wearing, it's unreal. Once I realized this and started digging in, this is actually when the whole theme cracked open to me, because I studied this and studied this and studied this and studied this and studied this. I'm like, what is the point? Why are they calling it Stranger? What is the point? That how it all broke open to me as I was trying to figure out who is the good guy and who is the bad guy when they're wearing red and when they're wearing blue. Is red good or is red bad? Is blue good or is blue bad? And I had an impossible time with it, because I'm like, every character is wearing red and blue, sometimes all blue, sometimes all red, sometimes a mix, but everyone is always wearing some kind of mix of those two colors. And the Duffer Brothers hide it brilliantly well. But if you go back to that series, it's like everything is either blue or red. Everything that they're wearing, even the uniform that Steve and Robin are wearing, like every single thing. Like Elle in season 5, whenever she's jumping, she has red shorts, she has a blue bandana. Blue and red are everywhere. So red is hypothetically good. So Code Red is a good example of that. They say it over the walkie-talkies. And blue is hypothetically bad. But you'll notice that there is a character arc for each one of these characters, and that in the beginning, a lot of the times they're wearing blue. And when they're doing the quote unquote the right thing, they're wearing red. So notice in season 5, I almost said Stephen 5, whenever they're Jonathan and Steve are both fighting for Nancy's heart, they're climbing to the top of that tower. You'll know Steve is in red, which means that that's who she's going to end up with in the end. Full disclosure. That is who she's going to end up in the end. It's not about right. It's about who's right for that person, right? But every single one of these characters has had a good and bad version of them. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Nancy in the beginning was quote unquote super selfish. Like, she told Barb to lie and say they were going to the house. She lied to her parents. She went over to Steve's house. She drank a beer. Barb kept saying over and over and over again, Nancy, this isn't you. This isn't you. This isn't you. And she said, Barb, you should go home. You should go home now. She goes upstairs, has fun time with Steve, and Barb gets sucked up by a Demogorgon and killed. And basically the whole town doesn't care. So Nancy is dealing with that guilt for the entire season, but that was the bad version of her. And in the beginning, all she's wearing is blue. When she's talking to Steve, she's on the phone, which is a blue phone. But then her character arc is she feels guilt from that, and she has a self-belief based on that she struggles with the whole season. So you see her character arc of then she starts doing good things. At the beginning, she slams the door in Dustin's face when he tries to offer her pizza. Hopper, in the beginning, he's taking pills, he's drinking, he's hanging out with a lot of women, blah, blah, blah. He is drinking on the clock. And then basically the owner of Enzo's is like, hey, you can't drive. And he said, I'm the chief of police. I can do whatever I want. That's a bad guy, right? Or you see Mike doing bad things. Like whenever Elle was telling the truth, he was like, you're a traitor. What's wrong with you? Every single time he came up to a conflict resolution with her, he's like, what's wrong with you? Why would you tell us Will was alive when he wasn't? Why would you do that? What'd you do? Dr. Brenner said that to 11 after she pushed Henry through the wall. What'd you do? That it's like every single character had some kind of good and some kind of bad. Usually it was bad to good, because they had some kind of self-belief based on something deep. You'd say like a character like Dustin. He lied to the team about Dart existing. He was like, oh, Dart's gone. He puts him in the bottom of his hat. Why? Because he loves Dart. A classically good reason. Or like Mike, why was he mad about Will and why did he blame 11? Because for a classically good reason. He cared about Will and he loved him. Lucas said 11 was a traitor. He's like, you're a traitor, you're a traitor, you're a traitor. Why? Because a classically good reason. He cared about Will and he just wanted to find his friend. Dustin lied about Dart for a good reason. He really cared about Dart. That it's like Steve in the beginning, Harrington, he was like Mr. Cool Kid, popular kid, wrote on a movie screen of like Nancy is a slut, or his friend did, and he stood by. That was Steve in the beginning. But then Steve has a character arc of like he suddenly comes to the good side, like quote unquote, of like he helps Dustin. He comes back and apologizes to Jonathan. He calls Jonathan a freak. He breaks his camera. And then he comes back to him and he's like, helping him out. Of like every single one of these characters you see do bad things, and usually for a reason of they misunderstood and they didn't give the person the benefit of the doubt. And then they had a character arc to where they started to do good things and evolve as a person, but it was all planted by some type of guilt because some type of self-belief. So like Hopper, for instance, he believes that everyone, and it comes out in the Russian jail, he says, I used to think that everyone else needed me, but I'm realizing that I need them and that everyone else is worse off when I'm around. That's why he tries to blow himself up in season 5. Will believed that he was weak. That's why he wasn't using his powers the entire time. Joyce believed that she was a bad mom. Here's a big fat I told you. We went into this last episode. Her guilt was that in the night that Will went missing, that she wasn't there. She was at work. So she's like, I'm a bad mom. And so you see her character arc of she's trying to make up for that the entire series, and she's crushed under the weight of that. 11 believes she doesn't belong. She says that several times. She's like, I don't belong. I'm different. Nobody wants me. And she believes that she's the monster. She's like, I opened the gate. All of this is happening because of me. So you see her do bad things sometimes because she's scared, right? But then you start to see her do good things. So what this all essentially means, and then I'm going to give a last tidbit of information, is that there is good and bad in all of us. We can do the good thing. We can do the bad thing. We can say that negative thing about someone. We can say that positive thing about someone. We can not give someone the benefit of the doubt. We can give someone the benefit of the doubt. We can encourage them. We can say something nasty to them. And you see all of these characters do both. They are not a clean crew, of like, you even see several of them reinforce that belief to the person. Like Jonathan says to Nancy, yeah, you're just a prissy little rich girl who thinks that she's so different, but is going to do the same exact thing that her mom's going to do. Like you see Jonathan hurl that at her. You see 11 hurl at Hopper. She's like, you're just as bad as Papa. And like sometimes they're doing that to each other. But the point of the whole series is like, instead of all of that, instead of focusing I'm good and they're bad, or they're good and I'm bad, either one of those, to just focus on how can I give someone the benefit of the doubt? How can I understand more of their perspective? And how can I, even though I've done bad things in the past, the next time that someone comes up to me and they tell me something that's like unbelievable, how can I make it a safe space for them of like to tell me? And how can I focus on doing the next time that I have an opportunity to do something that I've done bad in the past? Do I put the work into like say, okay, well, that sucks, but can I put the work in to just give someone the benefit of the doubt next time? Or like, instead of telling Barb she should go home, my friends in the future, can I stick up for them next time? Can I care about them next time? That's how character grows. Is like, you're only left with two things at the end of this life: the impact that you had on others, good or bad, and the size of it, and the amount that you grew your character and put that time in. So the entire representation of the series is not that, Upside Down and Dimension X aren't the stranger thing. The stranger thing is Hawkins, that everyone believes, even with the pitchfork in their hand, that they're good. Of like, and Jason had good reason. He's like, my girlfriend is killed because of some freak in his head who's a head of some group called Hellfire. You could see in that perspective why he thinks, he's like, that's a cult. This guy killed her. There's no way she should buy drugs. I love her, so I want him dead. Like, that's essentially the setup. But the truth is the exact opposite. So it's like, next time that we're in that position, instead of thinking that we're completely in the right, and someone else is in the wrong, do we open up ourselves and do we ask the questions? It's mirrored to sellers and buyers of like, that's essentially why I want to do this series. It's like, maybe I'm not communicating well, Probably not. We're an hour and 30 minutes. But it's like, just because I've tried to manipulate my buyer in the past, just because I haven't taken their back in the past, just because I've tried to get them to realize something or tried to get them to buy or said, what's the impact to you? So that they said something so that they move forward because my eye was on the prize and my eye was on them buying, not on them solving. That's the past. What am I going to do today? Am I going to ask a question that would help them find something that they didn't know and help them solve their problem, whether they work with me or not? Or am I just going to double down here? And that is a choice. That is the choice that they have in the series, and that's the choice we all have every single day. So you see that that character arc, kind of going throughout the series, but essentially that is the theme of Stranger Things. So the tidbit that I want to throw in there is, I believe you'll see in the last episode. So it's episode 9, essentially, that comes out on New Year's Eve. It's called The Right Side Up. I believe that's because Hawkins is the bad name. So everyone, you have a bad name, like meaning like a formal name that like Vecna uses. That's why he calls her Maxine, and then he says, he calls William, or 11, technically her name is Jane, or her name is 001, when she doesn't have an identity. So instead of that name, if the person's on your side, they call you by the nickname. So I believe that Hawkins is the formal bad name, but the right side up is when people choose to do the good. So that is a huge thing that's coming in. A couple of rules, and then we're going to go into the next question. No, that's it, and then we'll go into the next one. Okay. Next question. Leading questions. I'm going to be short here. Leading question is the fourth type of question I would stay away from. It's the fourth type of question that is quote unquote strange, that is after trying to sell. So a leading question is when you're trying to get your buyer to admit something, essentially, so that you can get them to believe something, so you can get them to buy. So doctors and lawyers both ask questions. The difference is in their agenda. So the agenda of a doctor and the agenda of a lawyer. Agenda of a lawyer is, how do I get someone else to admit something so someone else believes something? How do I get this person to say something where they were the night of November 6, 1959, so that the jury believes that they're guilty? Doctors asking questions to help diagnose. So because of those two goals, their role in the room and their role to the buyer, or their role to the other person, is completely different. So generally speaking, you're going to think that the lawyer is sleazier because of their agenda. So a leading question, and I would use a litmus test of, when you're asking the question, if you're busy thinking of your next question when they're answering, you're leading them somewhere. Or if you desire for them to answer in a certain way, you want them to answer yes or no, or you want them to answer 50 or above or whatever it is, then you're leading them somewhere. You're hoping that their answer is in a certain way so that you can lead them to the prize that they should buy. Or if when you ask them a question and they tell you your answer and then you immediately forget the answer, you're leading them somewhere. But essentially, a leading question is, I'm trying to get them to buy. So I'm trying to ask them certain questions to get them to admit this, to admit this, to admit this, because if they admit all three of these, then that means they should buy. You have to keep in mind, what the buyer says out loud to you does not mean that they believe that. Right? So I think that we're trying to lock people into things like mutual action plans of like, when do you need to solve this by, which is self-diagnosis question. And they're like June 5th or whatever it is. And it's like, well, if I get them to say that, then I can come back to them and send them some email that says like, why haven't you bought? It's June 5th. So blah, blah, blah. Statistically speaking, the stats are very clear. It's going to hurt your odds of close much more than it's going to help. So leading questions and trying to get the buyers to say something out loud, I'm going to call it the four stranger question. Is it's essentially, how do I ask someone something in a certain way to get them to admit something, so that if they admit this, then logically speaking, they should buy. Buying is not a trap. Selling shouldn't be a trap as well. Meaning, you can't set up a certain amount of gates so that if someone admits this and this and this and this and this, then it adds up to 15, and so all of a sudden they should buy. They have to deep down believe that they have not that this is our agenda, but they have to deep down believe that they have a problem that's big enough. And they also have to have the belief that they are going to be able to solve it if they move forward. That belief is going to have to statistically be strong, 3x stronger, essentially. They have the deep down belief that they're afraid that they won't be able to solve it. And we should take on that fear as well of like, if they move forward and they don't solve it, their situation is inherently worse. They have less capital, they have less credibility, they have less buy-in internally, but they also, like, they have all of a sudden subsumed the guilt of the problem the problem at hand. If there was a problem that existed before I came in, I'm not necessarily guilty for that. I haven't had anything to do with it. I haven't made it any better, but I haven't made it any worse. If I try to run the credit card and solve for it, now all of a sudden the problem isn't this problem. The problem is that I wasn't able to solve for it with my decision-making power and all the thoughts that I had around it. So I need to take that fear on as much as I can. If like maybe they're afraid for a good reason, maybe they're not going to be able to solve the problem based on what they're thinking. Maybe they're not going to be able to solve the problem if they execute in the way that they're thinking about executing. And that is my job as a seller, is how do I find those things in the room so that I can correct how they're thinking about going about something so that I can help them in the end. So that is the fourth type of question. See, I told you I'd be quick. Okay, fifth bucket of Stranger Things theories is going full circle. This one's going to be interesting. Then I'm going to tell you who's going to die and how it's going to end, and we're going to close out. So the fifth bucket of Stranger Things theories is, so we already have the theory of good and bad, which is red and blue. Keep in mind, anytime you see someone wearing red, it means good. Blue, it means bad. But the fifth theme is coming full circle. So each one of those characters, like I was mentioning in the beginning, they do something bad or they're selfish or they blah, blah, blah. They have to go through the entire journey so that they're different in the end. And they have to get over a negative self-belief. So you saw Will essentially get over that negative self-belief whenever he thought of himself as a kid with Mike, which was a really touching moment, which I definitely cried during. I bawled my little Sale's eyes out three times, and that was one of them. Was when he saw he had this negative self-belief of like, I'm weak. And the reason he had that reaffirmed was Joyce kept pushing. Let's keep him out of the game. Like, I don't want him going in, which was because of her negative self-belief of that she's a bad mom. Around and around the crap town we go. But point is, people have to go full circle around their journey, quote unquote, which I hate that word, but their journey to get to get to the next stage of who they are as a person. And you can't sub anyone in. So that song with Max running up that hill, it's not a song about swapping places. It's a song about trying to or wanting to, but that you can't. So Joyce, if she could, would have put herself in the upside down for Will, but you can't. If Max could have put herself in the way instead of Billy, she would, but she can't. And that's what that song is about. Every single song that's in that mix, it's about one of two things. Is it a good or bad dream? And it's about the progression of someone going through a certain circumstance. So you'll notice that the wall, how that's represented, is the wall, which is containing dimension X, essentially, that 11 can't get through, wasn't a line because Hopper and the other crew are trying to put it together of like where it begins and ends. It's a circle. And another representation of this is Max, when she was going through Vecna's memories, she said she was going round and round and round and round and round. And she said, and then at the end, I got completely lost because I was back where I started. I was back at square one. Or another time that this was mentioned was whenever 11 said, she was like, why was the guy peeing on it? And then Hopper was like, I don't care about any of that. We need to find a way out of here. And she was like, so that what? He was like, so then we can get back to the rest of the crew. She goes, so then what? And he was like, so that they can help us get through the wall. And she goes, do you think that they're going to help us get to through the wall more than we can? He said, well, I don't know. We have to talk through it. We have to figure out more about this wall. And she's like, so do you think that we have more information than they do? He was like, oh, well, maybe. And she's like, so then we're going to be back to square one. And he says, which is what? And she goes, why did he pee on it? So the whole theme here is that you cannot trade places with someone, and that everyone has to go through a certain character arc. Everyone has to be the bad guy to realize that they don't want to be that thing anymore. Nancy had to tell Barb to go home and then have the guilt of that, thinking that she killed her, and then have the guilt of holding back information from her parents and literally have to wash the blood of her parents off her own hands so that she could go through that character arc to get through that, to realize of like, no, I can't ultimately be guilty all the time, but I am responsible for my actions. So the next time that my friend says, Nancy, you aren't this type of person, that I'm like, you're right, we should go home together. And I'm sorry that I asked you to lie to your parents. So no one can trade places. So the how that's going to pan out essentially in the end is anytime that you see a self-sacrifice in the series. So a great example of that was Billy's sacrifice. Like, here's another great example. Billy's bad guy, right? He's Vecna guy, right? He got eaten up, right? But in the end, he chose good. There is good in everyone. There is good. There's bad in everyone. He could have said, 11's right there, gobble her up. But instead, he took that monster himself. Why? Because 11 cracked through with love. She was like, I saw your mom, and your mom was really pretty. And Billy smiles, and then he stands up and he goes to the monster and sacrifices himself. So anytime you see a self-sacrifice, know that that person is not coming back. So Billy is not going to come back. Eddie is also not going to come back. Those are the two self-sacrifices that we've seen. So you cannot trade places with anyone. And also, if you do sacrifice yourself in the series, that person is not coming back. The one that came back was 8, right? Because, well, she wasn't dead. But anytime there's a self-sacrifice, that cannot be swapped because it's inherently good. Okay. Is there anything else with that bucket? And then I'm going to go to the last one and we're going to close out. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, there's only one character that doesn't have anything bad on their record. I'm going to hint at that. We're going to go to the last question. Then I'm going to tell you what's going to happen in the end and who's going to die. There's only one character that doesn't have a bad mark on their record, who is always selfless, who is always after helping people, who is never doubting people, who is always believing in people, always encouraging people. And even when they did make bad mistakes, they did it for the quote unquote right reasons, because everyone always freaking does what they think are the right reasons. There's only one character that is ultimately quote unquote good. They're the representation of good. I'm going to make everyone think about that. We're going to transition for a second. But the last piece of this is, people have been asking in Reddit forums, they're like, well, why is Henry in those memories? You have to keep in mind, again, everyone has good in them. And when Henry started, he had done nothing wrong. He was a little kid that touched some cave equipment because he was curious. That's all that happened. Then, whenever he got transported to Dimension X and got infused with and touched the Mind Flayer, then when he came back, he tried to use those powers for good. He tried to help Patty find out who her mom was, and he was successful. He's like, it's Ella Fitzgerald. It was this song was played over the speaker. That's how she knew. So that's what he did that was wrong, was he tried to help someone that he loved find her mother based on a power that he was given that he didn't ask for and that he received by accidentally touching some stuff. That was his super big evil, right? So Henry was quote unquote good in the beginning. So you'll notice in all of those memories in that world, when Holly goes to that world, the reason he picked her is she's a shadow walker. He can't go into Hawkins, so he needed a shadow walker, and Will was clearly not going to be useful. So he picked Holly, essentially. because Vecna, in the end, I mean, he can't go into Hawkins, which is the whole point. So the reason when he brought her into that world, you'll notice that he says, "I'm going to save you from some monsters," and he means it. He's like, there are some monsters in Hawkins. And he's telling all those other little kids, Derek, there are some monsters in Hawkins. And when he gives Holly the warning of like, don't cross over this forest, he's like, because the monsters are out there and the monsters will get you. And she says back to him, she was like, so just don't go looking for him. He's like, correct. You have to keep in mind, he means it and he technically is in the right. Who are the monsters to him? Are the people of Hawkins. Those are the people that chased him out and told him he was different and told him he was scary and basically wanted him dead and said, like, oh, you're a demon. His own quote unquote, who he thought was his father, who isn't, is Victor Creel, is like, you're levitating in the attic. You're horrible. You're a demon. You need to be locked up. You need to be, this thing expunged from you. So in his memory, from his perspective, and it's a correct perspective in his, point of view, which is always according to our point of view, is he's like, the people in Hawkins are monsters. So he believes that he is protecting them from the monsters, but the monsters are the people of Hawkins. The monsters is Max. The monsters are all the kids who are the same, acting the same in his head as the people who demonized him for something that he didn't do that was wrong. So you'll notice that in his memory, 3 things. Number 1, he says, Holly, don't go after the monster, but he actually means it. The second thing is he knows all that stuff about Holly because he's taken on her perspective. But the third thing is he is wearing a tie. He is dressed the exact same as Dr. Brenner. And he's wearing a tie that is red. And I was like, why is it red? I'm like, oh, because in his view, in his memory, in his world, in his mind, he is doing the right thing. So Dr. Brenner, you have to keep in mind, like, beat him and put a chip in his neck and took him into the lab when he didn't want to go. He woke up and all of a sudden he was in control of Dr. Brenner because his mom put him, his mom originally wanted him to go there because she knew Dr. Brenner because she had yin-yanged with him. That's how she created Henry, but when he went into that lab, all these things that were done to him, like Dr. Brenner was the monster in his head. So it's really interesting that now he's doing the exact same thing that Dr. Brenner did because he believes that he's protecting Holly and the other kids from the monsters in Hawkins. So he's repeating the same exact mistake, but doesn't realize it. So the point of it is this. Instead of thinking of like it's me versus you or good versus bad or, good versus evil, to ask someone of like, take on their perspective of like, the number one thing that I hear about buyers and sellers is they're like, a buyer lies, a seller lies. And I'm like, you're both technically correct. The buyer lies. They lie about, are they the right decision maker? Do they have budget? Do they have timeline? Who are they currently using? They lie about the buying process. How willing are they to buy? Do they just want to get a quote because they want to, go and hike down the number from this other vendor? And the reason they lie to you and lie to you with a straight face is because in their head, their goal is to solve their problem. And you're the monster. You're the person that's trying to just get them to buy. And because those goals are mutually exclusive of like, your goal, it might not be directly to take me down, but because it's just to get me to buy, it's one and the same thing. You're trying to get me to buy something that I'm not positive is the right thing, and neither are you as a seller. So they lie with a straight face because you're the bad guy. You flip it to the seller's perspective, and a seller lies. A seller lies about, can they discount? They lie about products and features. Are they on the roadmap? Are they 2 years out? What are the limitations of the product? What are the average results? Not just like these shining case studies. And the reason they lie is because of their goal. Their goal is, I want you to sell. And so they're like, why does the buyer lie? And the buyer's like, why does the seller lie? And so on and on the fight goes. The reason that fight is happening is the exact same reason that the fight is happening in this series. We don't have goals that are the same. So instead of saying the buyer lies, So I'm not going to tell them that I can discount because they lie so I can lie. Instead of that, say, their goal is to solve a problem. So I'm going to figure out what that problem is and what they believe about it. So I can find out information they believe is not true and information they've missed so that they can ultimately solve it. That is the only time that you have a harmonious relationship, and the only time that things actually start to work out in the room where you're on their team. So the fifth and final question that I have, the fifth and final one that I have in terms of question is what's called a confirmation question. So a confirmation question, I like roll my eyes when I'm saying these. So the confirmation question is trying to get them to confirm that they believe something so that you can build off of it, so you can build a use case of why they should buy. We have got to stop building cases against our buyer. We're like ROI use cases of why they should buy. It's like, why don't we understand if they should buy first? What they should buy. And the first thing I'm going to have to know is the size of the problem, the true size of the problem with objective criteria. So confirmation question, it sounds like this. Can we both agree that blank? Can we both agree that your email open rate is what's holding you back from hitting quota? Can we both agree that if you repeat the same behaviors that you're going to hit the same amount of quota that you did last quarter? So the goal of the question is to get them to confirm something as that's an opinion as fact, because if I can't get you to say that fact, then I can't build off of that fact of why you should buy. But if I can get you to say that fact, then I can build off of that fact of why you should buy. So the thing that needs to be removed in all of these cases is the agenda, whether it's a leading question, whether it's a digital question, whether it's a subjective question. So leading question, you're trying to lead them somewhere. Digital question, you're just trying to ask them if they have a problem, yes or no. Subjective question, you're just trying to give them ambiguous terms that they have to self-define. Self-diagnosis question is what they believe. Or a confirmation question. All five of these, the reason that they are ineffective and the reason they should be ineffective, the culprit behind the whole thing is the goal, the agenda of the seller. The agenda of the seller in all five of these cases is how do I get them to say something, admit something, give me a piece of information, say that something's true so I can build off of it so that I can get them to buy. If that is ever the goal, I don't care what methodology it is. I'm going to go like it's 5:58 p.m. So I'm after work hours back. I do not care what method it is. I do not care what type of question it is. I do not like if the goal is to get the buyer to do anything, it will not work and it shouldn't work. If my goal is to get the buyer to realize something, to get the buyer to say something, to get the buyer to calculate the cost of inaction, to get the buyer to say that the impact's big, to get the buyer to admit pain, to get the buyer to feel that pain, to get the buyer to see something in a different way, to get the buyer to have an aha moment, to get the buyer to believe that I'm credible, to get the buyer to say who they're using. If the goal of any of it is to get the buyer to do anything, it's not selling. It's a manipulative agenda. The only thing that will help them is the only thing that is the role of selling, in my opinion, is how do I understand and help them by finding out information that they didn't know or information that they were incorrect on to help them solve their problem, whether they work with me or not. Until that agenda is the number one North Star, and I would argue at that point, you don't need a method. It's like, why don't I detach from the outcome? It's like, no, the outcome, having an outcome is not the problem. If you detach from the outcome, first of all, it's all an act. You're like, I don't want that cookie. And you want the cookie. You want to sell to them. So that's just pretending to manipulate or to persuade, which is just manipulate, or to influence, which is just manipulate. It's all different words of the exact same thing. Like it might be whatever, Jack or Johnny Walker or Johnny, Crown or Maker's Mark or whatever. or well, but it's all whiskey. It's all the exact same thing. How do I make the buyer do something through some weird technique or by asking them something in a weird way so that they say something? Or I've even seen sick ones recently of like, use a lot of empathies. I'm like, what? So you lower their guards so that they can buy, so you can sell to them? That's what you're trying to do, right? Until that is replaced, completely ripped out. Like the outcome doesn't need to be nothing, or I pretend like there's nothing. Then you just get questions like, what keeps you up at night? It's that the outcome needs to change from I want to sell them to I truly want to help them by finding out things that they didn't know about solving the problem. The wonderful thing about that is your bucket is much wider in that instance of like, now we're not just landlocked to the things that you solve for, of like you can help them through a myriad of different ways. It doesn't need to just be around what the root cause that you change. It's like if I give them an industry average, or if I'm like, oh, well, interesting. And they're like, what's interesting? I'm like, well, like, let's say that they had mentioned card not present decline rate for ahead of payments is a problem. I'm like, well, what is your card not present decline rate? And they're like, it's 1%. I'm like, interesting. And they're like, what's interesting? And I'm like, well, industry average is 2 to 5%. So you're actually a bit lower than that. But anything below 8%, it's not causing a decrease in transaction success rate statistically. And then I ask them another question. I'm like, what is your payment timeout rate, if you don't mind me asking? So it's like, I just deposited something to them. I help them understand that that's not the problem, what they think it is, but that will only happen materially. It will only materialize if your goal is to truly help the buyer. If your goal is to help the buyer, you're not trying to be human with them. You're not trying to empathize with them or like send them cookies or talk about irrelevant stuff or compliment them. Why? None of that helps them solve their problem. Put that aside. I'm not going to be a jerk. That's table stakes, right? But it's like, I'm not after sending them baskets with gifts in them and be like, don't eat walnuts, or have your daughter not eat walnuts because I know that she's allergic to them. It's like, that's all great, but that's outside of the problem that they're trying to solve from a business perspective. They are trying to solve a problem. So I need to do 3 things. I need to learn the information about my buyer persona, like the top 20 leading indicators that cause an increase or decrease in their lagging indicator. At what point do they cause a problem? And at what point is the industry average? I need to learn that information. If you don't know that information, you shouldn't be diagnosing with a buyer. If I don't even know what their lagging indicator is, if I'm selling to a CFO and I don't even know the measured on gross profit margin, you shouldn't be in the room. Maybe they believe you, and that would be a mistake, right? So it's like, learn that information, research the person in specific. I'm going to learn as much as I can before I go into the room. But the third one is acquire as much information as I can within discovery. Those are going to be 3 brackets. This one's going to be, I need to get, these 2 are going to be, can I get the information that are necessary to be able to diagnose? This one is, am I going to be able to do something with it that's going to be effective and help them once I do have that information? So that's the big culprit in sales. I'm like, you can put any kind of acronym you want on it. You can put any kind of methodology you want on it. You can put any kind of label or any kind of shirt or any kind of name or any kind of whatever. It is all the same stuff. How do I manipulate the buyer to think something or believe something so that they buy? Unless that is removed as the agenda and the goal, it does. The buyer's going to figure it out. They're going to sniff it out in 2 seconds. And they're going to shut down. And I'm like, good for them. Good for them, right? That goal needs to be, how do I help them? So to help them, I need to know a lot more information. So the questions follow suit. So it's like, good or bad in Hawkins. If the Hawkins are upside down, good or bad in my person as a character arc, good or bad in the sales floor. Is my goal truly to help them? If it is, then the questions are going to start following suit. Okay, here's a big blow up, then we're finished. Everyone's going to get back to their day. I'm so excited everyone showed up. Okay, here's the big end. Bucket number 6. Is anyone else going to come back? Who's going to die? And what's going to happen in the end? I'm going to be so short about this. I'm going to blow everyone's mind. Is anyone else going to come back? No. Everyone was like, Barb's going to come back. I'm like, Barb is dead. Okay. Everyone needs to let go of Barb. No one cared about her to begin with. If we're all honest. That was part of the shocking thing. People have been a lot of different theories. Sorry, I'm trying not to cover up my Stranger Things hoodie, so y'all all know that I'm into it. Like you doubted it. People are like, Eddie's going to come back. I'm like, no, Eddie is underneath the ground. The Duffer Brothers have said that. Eddie's not coming back. Billy might have a blip, but it would be like a memory, but he's not coming back. He was a self-sacrifice, so he's not going to come back. Barb's not going to come back. I was like, and I said this last session, just to remind everyone, the one who was going to come back that had to come back was 8. So now 8's back. When that happened, my first response was, y'all are going to throw up. I said, I told you so. I'm like, I knew it. 8 had to come back. Who's going to die? And I'm going to tell you why in a second. Who's going to die? It's going to break everyone's heart. It's, sorry, Amanda, I don't believe it's going to be Steve. I don't believe it's going to be Mike. I don't believe it's going to be Will. I don't believe it's going to be Robin. I don't believe it's going to be 11. I don't believe it's going to be Dustin. I don't believe that it's going to be Lucas. It's not going to be any of those people. It's going to be Joyce. Joyce is the one that's going to take the axe. I said this in the first session, but I was even more confirmed by it in season 5. Is it has to be Joyce. Joyce is the only one that hasn't done anything essentially wrong, but Joyce's guilt, and I said, I was crying whenever she admitted this, full disclosure, Joyce's guilt was that she's a bad mom because she was not there whenever Will, the night he went missing. So I said all this and everyone pinged me afterwards, like, you're crazy. Joyce doesn't think that. And then she said in season 5, she's outside with Will. And she had said several different times, she's like, Will, you're not going in. Will, I'm not going to send you down there. Will. Because she doesn't want him going down there because she's scared because the first time she wasn't there. So she has to go through that arc. And Will comes outside and she says, you need to get a coat. And his self-belief is that he's weak and that she doesn't trust him, which neither one of these are true, keep in mind. That's the tough part about it. But as she says to Will, she was like, the night that you went missing, I would come home and I would smoke cigarettes and drink cheap beer and watch Cheers reruns and then fall asleep. She said, I didn't know you were gone for 8 hours. She was like, what kind of mother doesn't check in on her 11-year-old son? And then he confirmed in that moment, he said, the reason that I'm gone is it's not your fault. And she said, 8 hours, Will. And it was a really touching moment. So she said, I'm not going to turn away, not this time, until this whole thing is over. So I believe for sure that Joyce is going to be the third self-sacrifice. She's going to self-sacrifice herself for Will. And it's not just for Will, but for everyone in the end. It's going to be heartbreaking, but she's going to be the third self-sacrifice. So they're trying to take on, in the end, the Thessal Hydra. So what they're going to need is 3 people to counter that, which I'm going to say who those 3 people are. But I believe that for sure, she's going to be the main character death. She's the only one that makes sense. They're not going to take away someone that they've already taken away. So they're not going to take away Hopper. They're not going to take away 11. She's been through enough. They're not going to take away Will. I believe for sure, and I was confirmed after that season, I'm like, Joyce is gone. And you have to keep in mind, Winona Ryder is the godmother of the Duffer Brothers, both of their children, or maybe it's just Matt. But I know that she's a godmother, one of their children. So she is the one that's going to die. I'm going to play you a short recording, and then I'm going to tell you what's going to happen in the end, and then we're going to close out. I'm going to do it within under 4 minutes. There is a number on the back of a poster during the Stranger Things. It's in episode 1, season 5, where it says Jane Hopper's missing. And so, of course, I looked at the sheet and I called the number. It's an Indiana number. And I just want y'all to hear what's on the recording. I'm like, Duffer Brothers, you are so good. Okay, I'm going to put.
Thank you for contacting the Hawkins Police Department. Due to the recent 7.4 magnitude earthquake, Hawkins is currently under lockdown to ensure the safety of our residents. The Hawkins Emergency Task Force is working closely with the Hawkins PD to track down missing
Is that not so dope? So if you call the number at 765-303-2020, it's on a poster in the background. So it says, if you have any information, call it. So of course, being an absolute loser, I call it. And it's set up to a Hawkins police recording, and it says that they're looking for Jane Hopper, which is really funny. Okay, this is what's going to happen in the end, and then we're going to close. I'm going to do this in under 60 seconds, 120 seconds, and then we're done. This is what's going to happen in the end. 8's back because she needs to work with 11 because Henry's going to turn and he's going to work with those two and they're going to overthrow the Mind Flayer together. Here's why. Henry believed everyone hated him, which they did, to be fair. And they chased him away because he was quote unquote bad. So he was like, no one loves me. And the one person I do love, no one will let me be with, which is Patty Newby. So I'm going to go work with Mind Flayer and I'm going to take everyone down. Like that was his mindset, which, again, somewhat fair. However, Vecna has limitations. He can't go into Hawkins. He can only go into the Upside Down and to Dimension X. But the one who can go to all three is Will and Holly. So I believe Will, for sure, is going to struggle and go back and forth on good side, bad side. That's why he took on the voice of Vecna. He can take on the perspective of everyone, which when you can take on their perspective, you start to see why they're doing what they're doing, which is kind of part of the point. So the Mind Flayer is just going to use whoever they want, whoever is the best tool. Vecna is the best tool for now, but Will would be better because Will can get into Hawkins. So I believe the Mind Flayer is going to start to use Will because Will can get into Hawkins. Henry's going to realize that the Mind Flayer didn't give a crap about him and that he's just a tool, but who actually loved him was Patty Newby, which is why they brought her up on the flyer. He's going to come back and he's going to say, crap, the Mind Flayer doesn't care about me, but Patty Newby does. And he's going to have a redemption arc and he's going to work together with 11, 8, and 1. One of the reasons I believe that, and then we're done, is there is a scene in episode, I want to say 2 of season 4, where there's a basketball game and a Dungeons and Dragon campaign going on together in tandem. And basically Erica and Mike and Dustin and everyone is, on a campaign together essentially. And they only have 2 rolls left of whether they can roll a perfect 20. They need to get a perfect 20 to overthrow hypothetically Vecna, which is Eddie in this case scenario, and win. So the first roll they roll is an 11, and Dustin does, and Eddie says, so it's a miss. And in the basketball game, Jason makes a shot and he bricks it. And then the second roll that they roll, they say to the death. We're going to do this to the death. Like we're going to throw in on this. And the second roll that she rolls is she rolls a perfect 20. And Lucas takes a second shot and he has an 8 on his jersey, which is how I knew 8 was coming back. And he makes it. Erica rolls a 20 and they both win. So I started doing the math, which is not hard math. 11 plus 8 isn't 20. So I'm like, she needs 8 clearly. So Callie's going to come back, which is how I knew that. But I'm like, 11 plus 8 isn't 20. It's 19. So they only need 1, which is going to be Henry. So the whole point behind the story is you need everyone. Everyone has to be talking. The Mind Flayer wants to take control of everyone, and you need everyone to counter the Mind Flayer, including Henry. And some people would be like, Henry, he's going to have a redemption arc? And it's like, but what did he do wrong in the beginning? What did he do wrong? He touched some stuff in cave equipment, and everyone took it in a different way, and then he helped Patty, and then everyone took it in a worse way, and then he flipped because everyone hated him. So I believe 11 plus 8 plus 1 are going to combine together to overthrow the Mind Flayer. Joyce is already going to be gone at that point. Sorry. And they're going to overcome the Mind Flayer together in the end. And then, and only then, is Hawkins not going to be Hawkins anymore. That's the bad name. It's going to be the right side up. The Demogorgons, there's a scene in season 1, the end of season 1, where they basically win the campaign. And they're like, the campaign can't be over. And they're like, why? And they're like, it's because it's too short. And what the line that Dustin says, or Lucas says, he says, what about the What about the valiant knight, the proud princess, and the weird flowers in a cave? I believe that once they ban the Mind Flayer into Dimension X, that all the Demogorgons, you see their face, it looks like a flower. So this is a wild prediction, but I believe that the Demogorgons are going to become the pretty flowers in the caves because the vines are going to be, essentially the vines are the veins behind pretty flowers, but the monsters aren't the Demogorgons. Dart had a good side. He let him through. So it's like both of those worlds, when they both see in each other the good, they both walk away the bad in the Mind Flayer. And they both, instead of having their mind flayed by unbelief, they work together and they believe one another and start working in communion with each other. That's when the right side up happens. So after 11, 8, and 1, which is the counter to the Thessal Hydra, it has 3 heads. They need 3 heads. And then Will's going to have to come in on top. And instead of going bad side, Will's going to have to go good side. And they say in that campaign, they're like, Will has to fireball. And the Thessal Hydra screams in pain and then knocks over, essentially is how the campaign goes. So that's what's going to happen. 1's going to have a redemption arc. 8 and 11 are going to have to work together. They're all 3 going to have to bind together because they all 3 have Dr. Brenner as a dad. They're going to have to go head to head with the Thessal Hydra, but essentially they're both as strong. So Will's going to have to come in on the back end, and instead of going to the bad side and being controlled by the Mind Flayer and like entering the perspective of Demogorgon or the vines, the negative hive mind, which is the vines, he's going to have to tap into the positive hive mind, which are all the kids and everyone on that end. And he's going to have to fireball the Thessal Hydra and win the thing in the end. So all the flowers, Demogorgons, are going to turn into flowers, and the right side up is going to be restored, and everyone is on the same team once they've come full circle. Everyone has realized everything about themselves, and so they work together as a team because of it, and work in harmony and love. That is it. That's how Stranger Things is going to end. Thanks so much for being a part of today. Full disclosure, episode next week. I'm going to keep these going. I'm going to keep them going. You know why? I feel like I don't, as a dweeb to my core, I feel like I don't have a choice. So there are 5 weeks in total. So I'm going to do probably an episode next week where we're going to go into a different perspective of strange things that sales reps do. And we're going to go into a couple of other theories. I hope everyone calls the recording. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. And I hope everyone has a really, really fun time when and if you do tune into Stranger Things, the next 4 episodes on Christmas or December 25th or Christmas Day. Have a great rest of your day, y'all. Bye.